Hello, everyone. My name is Guillermo Vizcaino. I am head of PR and marketing, lead writer, and video producer for Lienzo, an independent indie studio in the northern part of Mexico. And we are the studio behind Aztech Forgotten Gods. So we're happy to be here.
I'm really interested in this game's story. Like, how would you describe the story for Aztech Forgotten Gods?
You mean the actual in-game story or the story behind making the game?
Let's do both.
Well, I mean, the story of the game is actually a very, very personal one to me because this is the first time as an actual game writer that I get to write a full fictional, full-fledged story for a game. With our previous games, with both Hunter's Legacy and Mulaka, which were sort of two previous games, we focused on different things. With Mulaka, we focused on authentic cultural representation, and thus, we created an original story to tell that. But most of the narrative content was centered on actual myths and actual legends and stuff like that. So this time around, we wanted to tell something a little bit more personal. We feel like it's easier for people to empathize with a story that goes a little bit more into the personal levels. In this case, in particular, it's the relationship that you have with those that you're close with in a time of crisis, right? And I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will find this something that they empathize with, having just gone through the pandemic and having just gone through a variety of hard times globally. So that's basically what the game is about. We know that you may not be able to empathize with fighting huge Aztec gods and that whole shablam, but how that the relationship that you have with your mother, the relationship that you have with your best friend, the relationship you have with those that are very close to you, that changes when you're in conflict and in crisis. And there's going to be some fights, there's going to be some things that you're going to regret, there's going to be guilt, there's going to be a lot of things that we wanted to touch in the game, and that's what we set out to do. I was very, very privileged to be able to work with Alexa Ray Correa, who co-wrote the story with me, and we really made something that went along those lines, specifically with the relationship you have with your mother, how that changes and flexes and adapts and stuff. It's very personal. And of course, it's happening in this very high action, high octane, fighting the deities scenario, which we believe is going to be very exciting for everyone at home.
How did you go about designing the future world, and in what way specifically did the Aztec culture influence it?
Well, the world itself was actually not my original idea. It was the original idea of our art director who came up with this, mixture of futurism with Mesoamerica. Of course, the Mesoamerican side, it's something that's very dear to us, being in Mexico and, Mesoamerica in general, but specifically the Aztec or Mexica or Nahua culture. It's really dear to us. It's part of our roots. It's part of our national identity. So that's always something that it's out there that we always felt like it's one of the more interesting mythologies, and that it's not generally treated with as much flair and it's not showcased to the max of its potential. That's what I want to say. And so we wanted to do that in a way. And the way that we thought about going about it is take it into some unexpected, maybe not explored scenario, in this case the future, and see what that would look like. And so the original ideas for how we got there was thinking about, okay, so we have things like Blade Runner meets Atlantis, right? That kind of like line of thought, or just Wakanda, right? It's basically this what Afrofuturism is for that Wakandan community, for our Latin futurism in Aztec, right? And how those fantastic civilizations could have adapted and evolved and so on. So that's where the idea came from. And it's basically just that, right? An evolution of things that we know, things like architecture, things like social structure, things like theology, things like that. And just imagining that into this futuristic setting, doing a little bit of social commentary with how people tend to stray away from religion, and ergo we arrive at this scenario where the gods are forgotten, right? Thus the forgotten gods, things like that we thought were interesting. And so that's how we started building the world. And you need to remember, right, this is a process that took a long while. So it really went into a lot of different iterations and evolutions and changes and whatnot. until it became what it is today. You can see it; it's a very neon inspired, very cyberpunk-esque kind of influenced world. Where you can still find the pyramids and the stone carvings and the deity related kind of like structure and statues and whatnot. So hopefully people can see that and see through what we wanted to do with like the general aesthetic of the world.
Just because I want to interject on that question real fast, Ozzy. Guillermo, were there any inspirations for Bionic Commando when you were designing this game?
Totally, yeah. No, we have a whole lot of inspirations. Bionic Commando, obviously, what's his name? Doomfist in Overwatch, Gravity Rush, things like Darksiders, Zelda, a lot of different, we're basically grabbing inspiration from everything that's 3D action adventure centric, from indie games that kind of do this very vertical, very different type of verticality in terms of combat. Obviously Colossus fighters like Shadow Colossus, but even more than that, one of our main inspirations is anime in general, and you're gonna see this, especially in Mexico. We went through, especially across the 90s and the first half of the 2000s, the anime culture in Mexico was huge, and you cannot go one or two steps into the street and not find someone that was a huge fan of Dragon Ball or Digimon or Pokemon, and even after that, Yu Yu Hakusho and Shaman King and Naruto and things like that, and all of that, that hyper epic action, exaggerated, emotional, cinematography you can find in anime. We wanted to grab a lot of that, right, and bring it here. And that we went a lot more contemporary than that. We have a lot of One Punch Man in there, a lot of My Hero Academia in there, that really fueled a lot of those cinematic moments that we have in the game.
Beyond the setting, what other elements of Aztec culture are you incorporating into the game?
Well, as I said, architecture, it's a big part of it. Obviously, we had to do a lot of research when it came to the Pantheon, seeing as we are incorporating the actual gods in the game. And, you may not know about this, but there's a lot of different representations and a lot of different, images of how you could represent a certain number of deities, which of those are okay to represent in the way that we're using. Specifically thinking about the warring side of it, or the bellic side of it, which the Aztec had a lot of that because they were a warring people, right? But general mindset of the Aztec, mindset, again, because they were conquerors, they were the type of civilization that left by its own would have expanded, right, and would have conquered the rest of Mesoamerica. At least that's what the experts believe would have happened if the Spaniards would have come. The way they interact and they hold the whole theology side of things, and we incorporated that as world building, right? I mean, again, the story of an Aztec is a fictional story, but it's based upon, or it's built upon a base of actual research into what the culture is and what the culture could have been. And for that, of course, we were not experts, right? We needed to side with actual people that study this, and actual universities and archeologists and anthropologists and which was a long process. But I mean, with 3 years of development, you have time to do a lot of things, and that was part of it.
What can you tell me about main character Achtli? How did you and Alexa approach her concept and her backstory?
Well, with Achtli, we wanted to have a flawed protagonist, right? We wanted to have someone that the regular guy would be able to empathize with again, right? And with Achtli, we made sure to add a lot of damage. Achtli is a very broken character at the beginning of the story, at least. That's carrying with her a lot of guilt. I mean, I don't really want to spoil what happens in the game, right? But a lot of guilt about things that happened in her past. She is socially distancing, not like pandemic social distancing, but actually, social crippling and things like that. There's only a very select few number of people that she's close with, and the dynamic that she has with the outer world against, those relationships is very unique. She's not holding a stable job, and she's afraid to really put herself out there, things like that. And we wanted to have, that kind of broken character at the beginning of the story, so we can tell the story how she overcomes that, right? And the story, it's all about that self-acceptance and that putting aside all of that damage and putting aside all of that pain, and eventually reaching acceptance of the things that happen in life. And there's a lot that happens in life that you have to just accept, right, and live with. And that's kind of like the main talking points that we touched on with Achtli. She's still a very courageous girl. She's still a very her attitude it's very rocky. She's very direct. She's not mincing any words. She is a very special character in that regard. We think she has a lot of attitude and a lot of personality. And for us, at least in Lienzo, that's a new, right? And we generally go back and look at Mulaka, our previous game, and we see our main character, Mulaka, and we see a blank slate, and we wanted to stray as far away from that as possible. So giving her a very, very strong personality was part of the plan all along. With Alexa, we really managed to create a full-fledged character that has, you can kind of see where she's coming from. You can kind of see where she's going. You can kind of see when she makes mistakes, and she's going to make a lot of mistakes. You can see why she did, why she's getting some things wrong. And hopefully throughout the game, you get to understand how to overcome all of that. And that's basically what we want to do with Achtli.
What sort of abilities does she get from her stone arm that she suddenly wakes up with one day?
Well, she doesn't just wake up with it. There's actually an entire sequence at the very beginning of the game where she actually gets it. The arm itself, it's a very unique artifact, and there's a whole backstory to it. But it comes from some of the events in the past, and how the earlier the what would be present day Aztecs for us made and created, and the situation that they were in. When she finds it, she basically unlocks her verticality potential, right? She's able to launch herself into the air, either by rocket-like impulses, like very fast impulses, or by a jetpack kind of movement mechanic, where she can kind of sustain momentum and kind of adapt it in midair. She's able to grind on surfaces, so grinding on buildings, grinding on rails, grinding on like the metro, subway, like thing station, railway. She's able to actually grab on from buildings. She's able to, of course, punching, right? That's like the main thing that you do throughout the game. A variety of different punches, a variety of different abilities that I don't really want to spoil right now, but the gauntlet is able to use energy in a very interesting way, and so that eventually has its own ramifications towards what you can do by the end of the game. But the very core essence of it is that you now become this very 3D character, in the sense that you're no longer just traversing two axes, you're now going upwards too, and that opens up an entire set of abilities and things that you can do in the game that's very exhilarating, and that we try and keep fresh throughout your entire play session.
And of course, one of Ashley's main missions is to battle these forgotten gods. So who are these gods? And more importantly to me, how big are they? Like, are we talking about like Shadow of the Colossus size deities here, or how big do they get?
Well, they all depend. Like they are all, obviously they're all giants, but they're different sizes, right? And some of them are like gigantic. Some others are a little bit more building size, but they are all at least 100, 150 feet tall. Different types of movement. Some of them are a little bit more stay in one place and kind of cone around you. Others move, like for real, move around the stage, and you have to follow them and stuff like that. But we're talking big for sure. I mean, you think about games like Shadow of the Colossus, maybe that could be a good comparison in terms of size. Our main difference, it's the type of mobility that you use to fight them, right? And that's what makes it interesting, and that's where we see those key differences being. In terms of size, I mean, you picture a building, and that's basically what you're fighting, right? Huge, gigantic, moving buildings. That would be a good descriptor, I think.
And Aztech Forgotten Gods looks like such an ambitious effort. So I do want to ask, what sorts of lessons on the development side have you learned from your past games? You talked about working on Mulaka. And how have you applied any lessons you might have learned to this project?
Well, I mean, there's very few that we don't use in terms of lessons. Mulaka, the first thing or the most important thing, and it might be a little bit paradoxical, but with Mulaka we overscoped like crazy, right? And that's a novice studio's mistake always, right? Everyone that's starting to do this, everyone that's starting to game development, that's just doing their first project, they all want to do the next Zelda, right? And we were part of that, and we started creating this vast, incredibly complex levels and maps and whatnot. And we very soon realized that you kind of have to adapt what you're doing, your level design, your game design, even as a whole, to the capabilities of your team. And we are a 10 to 15 size team in terms of people that work at the studio, without accounting for collaborators and whatnot. So designing to your size, that's important. That was the main lesson that we had from Mulaka. This time around, we knew what the team was capable of after we finished with the previous game. After we finished with other projects that are not so much game related, we knew what we were capable of, and we set out our design processes thinking of that. And that led us to this, this explorable hub world that you can soar around and fly in and use your mechanics at. This variety of boss stages, this number of bosses, things like that, that we're using. And even after that, there's lessons of development that it might not be so interesting for people to really hear, for the general audience, but there's a lot that's going on the side of optimization, for instance, right? Getting a game into the Switch, it's the best way to learn about game optimization, right? And being able to put everything in there and what you have to take into account for patches and things like that. That really made us grow a lot. And you only get those lessons as you're finishing your previous game, right? It's not something that you can actually learn when you're starting. So now that we knew it, we were able to use it and implement it from the very get-go in Aztec. And we were very happy at the very beginning that we had the game running on the Switch, right? On the Switch dev kit very early on, and using those optimization techniques that we learned by the end of Mulaka at the very beginning of Aztec, and that allowed us to grow the game even bigger. So I guess that would be the main thing that we took from Mulaka onwards, that we're using right now in Aztec Forgotten Gods.
I want to go back to when Aztec Forgotten Gods was first announced. So what was your reaction seeing your game pop up during the Nintendo Indie World event?
Crazy, and even crazier for me, because it was myself that I was the first thing that came up, and I was like, hey, hello guys, this is from the and whatnot. It was a very surreal experience, and we had this to a certain degree with Mulaka as well, but when you're developing, and maybe this is something that other studios can empathize with, you kind of go into this bubble, right? And you're not really that much aware of what's going on the outside. You're still just holding the game very dear to close to your chest and whatnot. So just putting it out there was surreal. And then, seeing the scrolling comments on YouTube and Twitch and whatnot, and starting to see people speaking Spanish and being like, yes, a huevo cabrón, like that typical Mexican slang that starts to pop up and whatnot, and seeing them realize or recognize some of the things that we put in there, right? Like the pyramids or Quetzalcoatl, right? The feathered serpent, and being like, no mames, Quetzalcoatl, like that kind of thing. It's very special because it validates some of the ideas that you're not really sure. You're never truly sure that you're gonna be able to get across, or that if you're getting them across, you don't know if they're gonna be liked. If they're gonna be good ideas. So seeing people excited about them, seeing people cheering us on, just seeing people really getting behind everything, it's really, really surreal, and it gives you a huge breather after so long that you're unsure about what you're doing, and imposter syndrome for everyone just kicked in extremely. It just gave us a breather, and it gave us a lot of motivation to get past this final months of development, which are obviously the hardest part, right? Getting every last detail right. So it was great. It was great for the team. It was great for myself. Just excitement all around. Now the challenge is rising up to those expectations, right? And that's what we want to do, and that's why we're working harder than ever to get to that point.
And last one from me, what does it mean to you to get to tell these stories? Like, what does it mean to you to be able to tell the story of a culture that normally isn't represented in games?
It means the world. It totally means the world. I mean, we're very happy to be able to say that, a Mexican studio with Mexican money, right, with Mexican funding, that's all based in Mexican territory, it's able to tell their stories, right? And what better team to do it what better team to tell a Mexican story, or a Mesoamerican story in this case, which is obviously our roots, than a studio that's based here. And that doesn't really have to be us, but it's something that we're very proud of. And it's something that we know that we have that care, and we know that we have that it means so much to us that we know that we want to do it right. And it's not something that we can tell about studios elsewhere that might not be able to have that connection that we have with our own roots, right, as Mexicans or as Latin Americans. So it was a big thing. It's something that we're very proud of, something that we've been trying to do ever since Mulaka, which is also a game about a regional culture with the Tarahumara. And it's something that we think, and oddly enough, we because this caught us by surprise, it's something that we've realized that people enjoy, right? It's something that we've realized that not just in Latin America, but in the world, people like to hear and see new, different stories, right? And there's a certain subsection of the community out there they might love the Greeks and the Romans, and they might love the samurai and the ninjas, and they might love the Norse mythology, and we all do. But no, realizing that there's more out there, it's always a point of interest, and it's always something that gets them excited. And that's why we're doing it, right? Because we believe that our mythologies are just as grand and just as interesting as those other ones that I just mentioned. And so there you go.
Is there anything you would like to say to your audience in Mexico?
Yeah, totally. Muchas gracias a todos. First up in Spanish. We appreciate our audience a whole lot. It's the reason why we started. It's the reason why we keep doing it. I honestly believe that the Mexican audience and the Latin American audience is by extension, it's very passionate. We are one of the more passionate audiences out there, and that's both good and bad, because if they hate you, they hate you, but if they love you, they really get behind you. And that's we've been on both sides of the coin, and it's always been a huge motivator for us to try and be okay with our local audience. And so at this point with Aztec, and after all that we've done and the way that we've grown, we're very happy to see that Mexican audience is happy with the game. What I can say to them specifically is that we're still thinking of them, and we're still doing it because of them, right? And we wanna have a game that makes them very proud to have a video game development industry nationally, right? And hopefully we can one day compete with the Polish industry, or the American industry, or the French industry, or the Canadian industry, the big industries in the world. Why not dream big? That's what we want, and hopefully we can get them to that point in a number of years. Maybe not right now, but hopefully sooner rather than later.
For better or worse, we are a very passionate people.
We totally are.
Right about that. Thank you so much, Guillermo. Greg, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I mean, how do you follow up with that, man? That was a great ending to a question. I don't want to clog it with basic game dev questions. That was great.
You're a good editor, though. You can sprinkle it in.
Guillermo, can you talk about, like, obviously the scale of, you talked a little bit about the bosses and how big they are, but the hub world in itself is actually quite big. Can you give us a sense of scale of that world and how you made it even more bigger with your use of verticality?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we have verticality in the game, the fact that we have, in relative terms, a lot of speed going on with how fast you can move from one place to another, opened up, obviously has a lot of challenges, but it opened up a whole new world of possibilities in terms of side quests, in terms of additional optional content that we were able to then put into the city, right? And that goes all the way from side quests and NPC interactions to collectibles, for instance. And then the collectibles themselves allowed us to tell an even deeper story, not story per se, but an even deeper, have people go into a deeper length learning about the culture, right? It allowed us to show artifacts and things and parts of actual history, very much like an Assassin's Creed would do it, right? When you would go by and see the Hagia Sophia and be like, oh, that's very cool. Things like that we're able to put It's what we're using that city for. Exploring the city itself, it's always very fun. It's a perfect sandbox for you to utilize those abilities that you're getting, and kind of like a testing ground of sorts, where you can also find like little secrets and nuts and things like that. So that allowed us to, like, that's the purpose of the city. In terms of length, the city is a little bit of a model. It's modeled after the actual urban plan for the city of Tenochtitlan, or the holy city of Tenochtitlan in Mexico City. Well, what today is Mexico City. So that's the general layout of the city. In terms of actual length, of course, it has to be something that runs well and that we are able to populate and to give detail to. So it's not massive, you know. That's something to really, you know, be very, very specific about. It's not going to be a Skyrim level kind of thing. It's a controlled experience where you are for sure able to go in and about and explore and have a good time, while seeing all of the secrets and whatnot. But it's not going to be what can I compare it to in terms of like length? I wouldn't really know. You know, you have your select number of districts that you can see, and you're
Maybe
more
like Breath of the Wild. It might be good.
Oh, yeah, no, totally. That's definitely not Breath of the Wild. I can tell you that. It's a good chunk of a city. It's something that you're gonna have to see to really measure. Because if I tell you it's this long by this long, it's not really gonna tell you a lot. You need to feel it. And so I guess that's something I'm going to let our players kind of see and explore by themselves. I'm sure they're going to be happy with it.
And my very last question before I let you go is, I just want to know if there were any Aztec gods or characters that had to be cut either for budget reasons or mechanic reasons or just time constraints, anything like that you can share with us.
Always. Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think there's a game out there that's safe from, you know, having to cut out and killing how do you guys call it? Killing your babies, you know? There's a lot of bosses and a lot of characters and a lot of even storylines that we had to cut because we just don't have enough hands to put everything in there, right? So there's content to spare. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing, you know. For one side, it's obviously we're never happy when we have to cut something out of the game, other than having a full game that we know that we can work on fully and give it that, you know, that bar of quality that we're gonna give it. But on the bright side, it's always content that we can come back to if the occasion arises, right? And that can be in a number of different ways. But it's just content that lives within the universe that we can use. And whether that means DLC content, or whether that means a sequel, or whether that means what we're doing with the movie, right? With Impossible Dream, just have that universe, that content for the universe exist is always good, and allow us the opportunity to revisit it. So we're okay with not having it in the game just yet, and hopefully use it sometime in the future in some way or another.